Welcome everyone to the American Civil War Museum's Homefront Education Series. My name is Joseph and I am joined once again by Stephanie Arduini, the Deputy Director of the museum. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's happening in 1864, especially as it regards to African American troops. So Stephanie, what are we looking at this point in time?
So 1864 is a little bit different when it comes to military strategy and how that plays out in its effects. So in the first part of the war, a lot of the strategy was capture something, capture Richmond, capture the Mississippi River. But when Grant takes control of the United States Army and comes here to Virginia, the tactics really change to just wear out the Confederate Army, but especially Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. So you see a lot more siege situations and trench warfare, which just drives the number of deaths really, really high. And for the overland campaign here in Richmond, well, in and around Richmond, they're visiting some of the same battlefields that they were on 2 years before in some of the same places. So sometimes when they're digging trenches, they're finding bones of soldiers who were killed just 2 years before. So it's different in tactics and the number of deaths and the type of warfare that happens. It's also different because now you have United States colored troops actively serving in the military in those engagements. And they're fighting Lee's Army of Northern Virginia for the first time. So this symbolic head of the Confederate Army now has black soldiers fighting against those soldiers. And there are some really compelling examples that highlight just how much is at stake for those USCTs.
Yeah, after all, we had mentioned before that the prisoner exchange system had broken down, and most part because of the USCT's involvement in the war. We saw that the unwillingness to exchange or to treat colored or African Americans as the actual prisoners kind of led it to make a decision to stop the exchanges altogether.
Absolutely, because the United States government's response is they're soldiers, you treat them as soldiers, but for Confederates, their response was, we're going to respond according to the laws of our states, which means that we see them as either escaped enslaved people or enslaved people in open insurrection because they've got weapons.
Right.
So that means that they are subject to either being sold back into slavery, to physical punishment, or death, immediate death. So in some cases, and famously you hear about the examples at Fort Pillow and even at the Crater just south of Richmond in the Battle of Petersburg, where black soldiers are trying to surrender along with the white officers surrender and the black soldiers are murdered right there and killed.
Wow. Yeah, but it doesn't really stop them, does it? Especially at certain other battles with New Market Heights is a great example where black soldiers continue just to push forward, and no matter how many losses, in some cases just walking over the bodies of their fallen comrades, they're keeping on going and knowing that this is what they have to do.
Absolutely. Of the about 200,000 black men who served in the United States military during the Civil War, we estimate that about half were born into slavery. And that's just an amazing thing for me to consider, of getting out of one system of violence and trauma and putting their bodies on the line to fight, which for many of them is very clear that this war is to end slavery and bring freedom to enslaved people and African Americans. The Battle of New Market Heights is really fascinating to me because of the 25 Congressional Medals of Honor that were awarded to black soldiers during the Civil War, 14 were awarded to soldiers from that one battle in September 1864. And Benjamin Butler, the commanding officer, was so impressed with the valor and the service of the men that day that he personally paid for and minted another medal called the Army of the James Medal. And we have one on loan from the Massachusetts Historical Society right here, just because he was so impressed. And I think that speaks to the dedication and skill and bravery of these men and their commitment to ending the institution of slavery.
Absolutely, and it's a great thing to look at too, because that was important for them. That was a motivating factor, and really helps define the war itself. It also helps with Lincoln's election, for sure. But now thinking about those who are still stuck in those war camps, the ones who are no longer getting exchanged, what kind of conditions are they seeing in this moment now?
So when the populations balloon, it's not like the camps are really getting many more supplies or anything like that. So in a lot of places, whether they're in northern states or southern states, there's a lot of exposure, overcrowding, starvation. Disease is rampant, just like when you have armies with people put together in tents. It's exacerbated when people are also malnourished and dealing with disease and exposure. So you get high mortality rates there. And if you go into a prisoner of war camp, especially before the system breaks down, and we see some of these in journals of people who had been imprisoned over at Belle Isle, just across the street from our museum.
Right.
There was a large prisoner of war camp there, who go into it feeling like it's okay. I'm only going to be here for a little bit, then my government's going to exchange and I'll get out and that'll be fine. But that doesn't happen, and their morale just tanks because they feel abandoned by their government, by their military. There are some people who get out and rejoin the army. We talked a little bit about Ole Johnson, who was able to escape and get out, and he rejoined the military. And the other thing I'll mention about POWs is they're soldiers and officers, but they're also civilians who are captured and put into prisons and prisoner of war camps. And we've got some amazing stories of some of those civilians. For example, Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, who was a physician during the war, was captured and charged with espionage and put into a prison here in Richmond. And there are just so many examples of desperation but bravery. It's a hard thing to try to imagine, putting yourself in the shoes of people who were there.
I think it's really important to bring that civilian aspect of it too, because Dr. Walker also received the Medal of Honor, although they tried to take it back afterwards. She never gave it up herself, and so it has been restored, and she has kept that Medal of Honor. But she's an important civilian to look at in that aspect, and also other civilians who are helping get those POWs out of prisons. Including the famous Libby prison escape right here in the city of Richmond. So always good to see how all of these things tie together. I'm really glad that we got to tie them together with you all today, and hopefully you'll continue to join us as we wrap up the actual walk through the war, moving into 1865 and beyond.